hours after the attack on October 7th, Israel actually declared formal war for the first time in decades. And as if on cue, the entire world seemed to have gone to war right alongside the fighting forces, pitting pro-Palestinian voices against pro-Israeli voices on social media. And that's nothing new. We've seen that happen time and time again. I mean, Israel is in the unique position where it's always fighting parallel wars. On the one hand, we've got the physical war, boots on the ground, and then on the other, there's the war for public opinion. But sadly, regardless of how well that physical battle is going, and regardless of the lengths that Israel does to preserve human life and to tread carefully and to be the most moral army in the world, the battle for public opinion never seems to be going well. I mean, why? What's wrong? Isn't the truth supposed to triumph? Well, here today to help us wade through that miry clay of public opinion is Eitan Chitayat. Eitan, welcome. Eitan is a creative director, copywriter, brand builder, and the founder of the Nati branding agency in Tel Aviv. He's been delivering branding campaigns for B2C and B2B clients for over 25 years, having lived in Hong Kong, London, Tel Aviv, New York, and Boston, working with big names such as Google, Volkswagen, American Express, and Toyota, as well as Israeli companies like Amdocs, the Jewish Agency for Israel and Hamas. In 2015, Eitan created a video that went viral called I'm That Jew, and it's been viewed more than 15 million times on various platforms. He also gave a popular TED Talk to explain the motivation behind this clip. Eitan has consistently been an advocate for Israel and the Jewish people, gaining a following on social media, but since October 7th, he's dedicated all of his time to fighting Jew hatred and anti-Semitism, focusing on building Jewish pride. Eitan, welcome. The mic's all yours. Eitan, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure.
Now, you have consulted with the who's who. You have done campaigns for all the big names, but I think your name was launched into the spotlight with that video clip that we just mentioned. I'm That Jew. 15 million views.
Something like that, yeah.
Now, I have so many questions about that, but let's suffice with the following.
Sure.
For those of us who haven't seen it, and yes, I will give you the link to that in the bio. However, can you just give us a brief synopsis, 30 seconds of what it's about? And then what was your heart in making it? And why did it touch so many hearts?
Sure. After Charlie Hebdo, if you remember the massacre in Charlie Hebdo, there were a couple of Jewish people that were killed in a kosher supermarket. A friend of mine who was living in France at the time, who's Jewish and lived in Israel, I called her to check in on her. And she was terrified, and she wasn't telling anyone that she was Jewish. And I thought to myself, this is in 2014, 2015. How can, in this day and age, someone be afraid to say that they're Jewish? And so I sat down and I wrote, I'm That Jew, and I just sat down and it just came out. And what I was feeling was I was feeling solidarity with her. A lot of people that see the piece think that I'm speaking about anti-Semitism, and it's a statement about anti-Semitism, but actually what it is, it's a statement of solidarity for my Jewish brothers and sisters around the world. And I think I was able to maybe break the stereotype. When you say a Jew, you might think a land grabber, we own the banks, we own the media, all sorts of ridiculous things like that. And my statement was, no, that's not me. This is me. And I'm not one thing. I'm infinite things. And I think that spoke to a lot of people.
I want to discuss the war that we are all engaged with at the moment. And that is not a war that's happening on a battlefield on the ground. It's not a physical war. Now, for that, let's go back approximately 11 years, way back when in 2012, Operation Pillar of Defense. And that was the second conflict between Israel and Hamas, if I'm correct. Now, that is currently being known as the first social media war. Fancy word just for the IDF, Hamas, ordinary citizens taking to, then it was Facebook and Twitter only, sharing their images, sharing their videos, argumenting, sharing what this is like for them. So can you help us out a little bit with the origins of the social media war? How did it start?
I remember back in the day on Facebook when people just used to post pictures of their families and funny videos, and it was very like personal, getting to know people, staying in touch with people. And I remember during that war when all of a sudden I felt people started posting things that were very anti-Israel. And I'm an Israeli. I was born here. I grew up in Hong Kong and London. I lived in New York and Boston. And I came back to Israel around 15 years ago. And I saw what people outside of Israel were saying, including friends of mine and colleagues. And the things that some people were saying were simply not true. And I don't think that it was something intentional. I think that people started sharing things from resources that somehow had gotten to them. And I felt that it was my responsibility to counter the lie, counter the false narrative. And it was tough to do because I'm not a famous person, I'm a dad. I've got 2 kids, and at the time, I had 1. And it was very, very disturbing for me to see people that I knew sharing things that I knew were not true. And so I started speaking up. And you started to see other people speaking up slowly. You also started to see people who were spreading things about us, whether it was intentional or not intentional. These false narratives were being amplified. And that's kind of scary, because when you have people saying things that are not true about you, and it's on a global scale, like social media, even at the time, like what's happening now is not a surprise for me, because you saw it coming a while back. And it's just grown and grown and grown. And this social media war wasn't really a war to begin with. It was just people expressing. But now it's turned into a war because there is an agenda. There's an agenda that is being fueled by, I think, parties that are interested in more war, more conflict, more anti-Semitism, more intolerance. And there are people who want to counter that with the truth. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a very, very complex thing, which I think boils down to something very, very simple, which is there are a lot of stories out there, a lot of narratives out there, and a lot of them aren't true. So what are you going to do about it? Are you going to just sit back and say, hey, it's not my problem, I'm just going to live my life? Or are you going to do something about it? And when I was growing up, I see in your library here, you have lots of books about the Second World War. My grandfather had all the books that Churchill had written. He had The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William L. Shirer, which is a book that thick. And it was a responsibility to read it and to understand it and to learn it. And that was my generation, like a few decades ago. Today's generation, I think the young people, they don't read, they don't learn, they don't get into things. It's very bite-sized information. And I think that that's scary. I think that that's scary because when you let that go for too long, then you get to the stage when people are just seeing something, assuming it's true, and if it's interesting and it's moving and it turns you on, you'll share it on social media. And that's what's happened. And we're in that perfect storm of kind of what's true and what isn't, anti-Semitism, intolerance, all of that together, because it's so easy to share things now, and so much of it isn't true. So I decided, at least with my stuff, is I'm going to put out what I know is true. And that doesn't mean that I'm against Palestinians. It doesn't mean that I'm against Islam. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. What I'm against is I'm against intolerance, I'm against hatred, and I'm against
people coming to slaughter you.
Yeah, but it doesn't start with people coming to slaughter you. It starts with people speaking. It starts with narrative. Words, how did Hitler come to power?
Words.
Yeah, I mean,
Man could speak.
Around, I don't know how many percent of his power was Goebbels. It was narrative. And I think that's where, for example, the Palestinian movement has succeeded so well, is with their narrative. They've invested in narrative. And this is what I keep telling Jewish and Israeli and Jewish allies. Narrative, 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 narrative. Narrative is important. Narrative is important. You have to invest in narrative. And social media is narrative. The problem is, what happens when it's false? What happens when it's sexy? What happens when, dead pictures of dead babies sell? I'm not saying that's sexy. It's not sexy, but
it's emotive.
It's emotive. And we're facing accumulation of decades of a narrative that just landed on us. And unfortunately, we haven't been there. As a Jewish people and Israel, we haven't invested in narrative like we should have, and they have. So we're behind the curve. We're massively outnumbered, and we are also not organized in terms of the Jewish people, which we're starting to mobilize now. But that's social media. It's not just something that happens. Sometimes it does, but I think here it's organized.
I do want to speak about narrative.
Sure.
But firstly, let's backtrack a step or two. I feel like social media reporting on the ground, sharing what's going on, that's great. It gives you an insider's perspective. However, possibly the one casualty in social media warfare is truth. And we've touched on this often. How does that happen? And can you give me a number of examples of the social media inaccuracies? We've all come across them. But for instance, genocide. Genocide is terrible. Am I against it? Absolutely. However, the question is it applicable to Israel? So how do inaccuracies become truths like that? Because I feel like it's true because I saw my friend say it on TikTok yesterday. So therefore, it must be true. How do we deal with that and what to do? That's a lot too.
Well, I mean, I try and tell my kids as a dad, you can't believe everything you hear. You can't believe everything you see. You have to step into the shoes and of the person, of the situation on the ground. And that requires not being lazy, doing the work. If I hear that there's a genocide in some province in China, I don't automatically assume that just because someone's telling me that there's a genocide there, that there's a genocide there. And that's one of the challenges we have with the world today, that facts don't matter. And I think people have been saying that a lot, facts don't matter. But what does that mean? If I show you right now a picture of dead people on the ground, and I say, look at this terrible thing that happened, and look at who did it, am I going to believe that immediately? Or am I going to look into it and try and understand context? Because the ramifications of just, look, there's no denying that dead, killed people on the ground is an awful thing. So to examine facts doesn't mean that you're not empathetic to that. But what it does mean is, let's understand the context here. Where are these people? Why are they here? Did anyone stop them trying to leave here? Were they warned about not to be here? Do they believe certain things that made them stay? I'm just making things up right now, but I think that context is so important, because then that allows you to get to the truth. And what's happening with this genocide claim is people are saying there's a genocide, there's a genocide, there's a genocide in the context of this conflict right now with Hamas. And they're not really understanding what a genocide is, first of all. And a genocide is the intended targeting of a certain population, a certain culture, a certain race, a certain people, and intentionally trying to wipe them out. Like literally, wipe them out, eliminate. The Nazis, that was against the Jewish people, that was a genocide. That was an attempted genocide. And the crazy thing is, if you look at the Hamas charter, which has been updated, but their intention is very clear. No Jews anywhere, not just in Israel, no Jews anywhere. If you look at what they teach in their schools, you look at the map of Israel, there is no map of Israel. It's Palestinian, which means, well, what happens to the Israelis? What happens to the Jews? So people are repeating this claim of genocide without understanding, A, what a genocide really is, and not understanding and not wanting to believe what's actually really happening on the ground, which is not a genocide. If there is a genocide in the context of the conflict, then we're doing an awful job, because the Palestinian numbers are just like this throughout the last 75 years. It doesn't mean that Palestinians have not been killed. It doesn't mean that there have not been wars, but an intentional killing of the Palestinian people as a people, it's just not happening. And people who are watching this who don't agree with me, who have heard genocide, 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 there might not be any talking to them because they've been so brainwashed already. But if you are able to take a step back and be objective and read that book and meet people and come to Israel and see what's happening, you'll see very quickly that that's not true. The problem is, that's not the world we live in, is it? I mean, no. people aren't brought up to do that critical thinking, which is critical for knowing what's going on, and not living in like La La Land, not in crazy made-up fantasy world. So, and you also have to remember, like, the people who are saying, for example, something like genocide, do they have an agenda?
Right.
Agenda is very, very important. That's also part of the digging deep. Well, who's saying this? Why are they saying this? Is there an ulterior motive here? Are they objective? And I think that Israel, for better or for worse, we are a democratic state. We do have a pluralistic society. We have Muslims living in Israel, Arabs living in Israel. We have Christians living in Israel. We have Jewish people living in Israel. We have all sorts of people living here. It's a pluralistic society. It's a democracy. Are the people who are saying this in our neighborhoods, are they a democratic society? Are they allowed to express themselves, or are they just being told what to say and saying it, repeating it, repeating it, repeating it? It's challenging, but you have to double down on the truth, and that requires work. It's Jordan Peterson, who he has a quote which I really like, and it goes something like this. He says, "You want to have an adventurous life? Tell the truth. Boy, will you have an adventure." Because the truth is hard. People don't want to hear the truth sometimes. They just want to hear something that'll make them sit up and, but the truth can be boring.
And it's real.
It's real,
It's gut-wrenching. And,
yeah, it might be a little, you might have to sit through it, but I think that's important to do. The consequences of not, by the way, are I think what's led us all to where we are today on social media, just making stuff up, and there is a real price to pay for that.
The other side to this, which I see, is we know that Israel has more foreign journalists than any other nation in the world, right? That means the result of that is that this conflict is going to be in the international spotlight. It is the most talked about thing at the moment. Everyone's eyes, the eyes of the entire world, is on this conflict. Now people are sharing left, right, and center. And that gives the idea that this is the only place in the world that this is happening. We've spoken about Gaza, genocide. And we see the pictures of the civilian casualties there. And it's tragic. It is. However, the fact that that is shared on social media, it gives the impression that that's out of the ordinary. That doesn't happen in any other war. When in fact, unfortunately, it's common. It's war. But we don't see it. Now, Eitan, we've spoken about truth. The other weapon I see in social media, and the other pitfall, is AI and deepfake. And that's something we've seen a lot in the social media conflict, especially from the pro-Palestinian side that says, October 7th never happened. It's deepfake. It's a false flag operation, and Israel staged it all. But is there a way to speak to that? If that is one of the weapons they use, is there a way?
I think that everything's kind of out of control right now. And and when I say we, I don't mean Israel. I mean the world is in real danger. Because when things are faked and spread online, you're entering an Orwellian future. And I actually recently read 1984 again. I got the graphic novel. There's a graphic novel of it.
1984, explain.
So 1984, the novel by George Orwell. It presents a world in the future where there is no truth anymore. That anyone can say anything, and a certain political body has come into power and conditioned everyone to believe a truth that isn't true. So people's minds have been hijacked. And there's a similarity to where we are right now, where this is the beginning, that those people who just let this go, who don't challenge false narratives, whether it's by real people who intentionally want to misinform, or by the silent majority who just, it's not my problem, I'm just going to let it go, or people who are delivering technologies like bots, which I'm facing a lot of, which I can talk to you about, or deepfake stuff. If you don't challenge something that isn't true, it'll grow. The false narrative will grow and grow and grow. And then eventually those false narratives will be perceived as truth. And the truth, or the people who believe in the truth and want to highlight the truth and advocate for the truth, they become a minority. And that's a very scary world to live in.
The production of this investigative series is made possible by the generous donations of Christians from around the world. You can also make a difference by supporting this initiative. We want you to share, to give, and be a voice so that we can produce more series like this. The truth about what is happening here in Israel and around the world must be told, and it must go out. Please click on the link to donate.
And the question is this just happening randomly? Or is this something that is being planned and organized and funded. And I think it's a bit of both. I think that you have international players like Iran, China, TikTok. Look at TikTok. There is evidence that the Jewish narrative on TikTok is being suppressed, and the Palestinian narrative is being completely opposite, is being supported.
Expound on that a little bit for us.
Well, there's if you think about the governments, and again, I'm not an expert. If you want an expert, we can talk about like bringing on Emily Schrader or something. But there is a vested interest in, I think, world domination. Is it going to be Western values? Is it going to be China values? Is it going to be radical Islamic values? And the power of China is growing. And you saw with elections how, the Russians and the Chinese were able to influence American politics in America. And they did. You can do that with other things too. You can pit people against each other. So this rise of bots, where what it basically means is if I say something on social media, if I post something on, I don't know, Facebook or on Instagram or on Twitter or on TikTok, then I can be targeted by people or bots that the agenda is to not agree with my position and to flood my feed with people who deny what I'm saying, disagree with what I'm saying. And it makes it seem like real people are disagreeing with it. And so when you see someone saying something on social media and you get tens of thousands of comments to the contrary, then you as a human being are like, oh, well, that must be true because a lot of people are saying that it's not true. And then innocent people who honestly don't have, okay, well, I'm not here and I'm not there, they'll probably go to the majority is saying this, so it must be true. That's happening a lot when it comes to Israel. That's happening a lot. It's fueling anti-Semitism, and too much of that happening, too much of that not being countered, it'll just grow and grow and grow and grow. Why it's so important right now? It's so important to speak up. To speak up against things that don't make sense. When someone says something, to fact check it with real, and that's another problem. What's a real journalist?
Oh, my goodness, that's another thing of the social
media. You're going to go to CNN,
wars.
Is it Fox, or is it you're going to go to Candace Owens, or are you going to go to Joe Rogan? I mean, these people are not, journalism, to me, it's a shame. Like, I think journalism, real true journalism is dying. And there are social media influencers, and I'm not a social media influencer, but there are social media influencers who have a lot of power based on the amount of followers they have, not because of what they know necessarily. And some people, of course, are influencers with a big following and they know a lot. And I think that those people are the ones to follow. But then there are ones who have, like, look at Kanye West. Kanye West had, what, 100, look, Bella Hadid, I don't know the number, but I think it's 150, 170 million followers. There are 9 million people in Israel. She has over 100 million followers on Instagram. So when she says something which is, let's say, anti-Israel, whether it's true or not,
Bella Hadid said it.
Bella Hadid said it. And so
it must be true then.
It must be, yeah. That's what we're up against.
Oh my, okay, all right. Case in point with the bots. Mm-hmm. I see that so often.
Yeah.
Simple example, IDF posts. Mm-hmm. Here we bring you evidence from the tunnel in Gaza. We're showing you left, right, center. This is where they come in. This is how much this tunnel would have cost. And then you have thousands of comments. Mm-hmm. This isn't true because exactly.
Yeah.
And Israel doesn't have the manpower to go and counter every one of those. So, okay, let's get to that. But first, a question. In your opinion, who do we follow? And we'll put it in the bio. However, Can you give us a few suggestions of who to follow? You said journalism is a bit of a shame at the moment. So give us, in your opinion, who speaks truth, except for you.
I think that there are quite a few people to follow. I think that one of the most important things to do is follow people who are on the ground, not only, but people who have been on the ground. You know, you have a lot of people sitting in their armchairs in Europe, in America. They've never been here. It doesn't mean that you can't have opinion, but I think the people to follow are people who have seen with their own eyes. They've spoken to people on both sides. I think Douglas Murray has done an extraordinary job, and he's not Jewish. He's done an extraordinary job of truth-telling. I think I mentioned her before, Emily Schrader. Arsen Ostrovsky, he's great as well. I've recently discovered, though, even someone who is the lead singer of a band called Disturbed.
I know.
David Draymond. I didn't know who he was a month ago. Again, I'm ridiculous.
Neither did I.
But
Okay.
he is, you know, he's a singer, but he does speak the truth, and he speaks the truth based on experience. I think that there are also several Arab, Muslim, and Christian, let's call them influencers, people with a reach. You had mentioned before that you're going to be interviewing, or you have interviewed, Bassem
Eid.
Eid.
Yes.
He's
Brilliant.
wonderful.
Yahya Mahamid
Yes.
is another one. He's great.
So there are people out there to follow.
Yosef Haddad.
Yosef Haddad is fantastic. Now, look, Yosef Haddad isn't necessarily objective in the sense that he is very much for Israel, the democratic state, but he is an Arab. So you should listen to him, because I think that he's got a different perspective. He's on the ground. He's also doing a lot of work speaking to people. He speaks to people on this side, he speaks to people on that side. But he's courageous as well. He is courageous. You know, his life is in danger, speaking his truth. So I think that there are plenty of people out there to follow, but I'll tell you the ones not to follow. The ones, and I get this a lot, is when you say something, when you put something out there, and you are challenged on social media, you can tell when it's a hater, because the hater will automatically say, F you, you don't know what you're talking about, they'll swear at you, goodbye. Or they'll come up with a statement that is literally copy-paste, cookie-cutter, this is genocide, this is apartheid, oh yeah, you baby killer. Okay, I'm 52, I've got 2 kids of my own, I'm happily married, I live in Israel. I've been an advocate for peace all of my life. I'm not a baby killer. I'm not an apartheid supporter. I'm not a white colonialist. I'm not even half Iraqi, half Bulgarian. You tell me what that is. But apparently I'm a baby killer. Apparently I support genocide. Apparently I've been put in a box. I've been stereotyped. Those people, when you see that, when you see intolerance like that, and someone who is not open to hearing another side, who is not open to arguing fact, that's someone, red flag. On both sides, by the way. Not just on you know, whether it's this narrative or that narrative. This lack of openness is what's fueling this intolerance. And bots, you know, there's no one to speak to. You know, there's just hatred, and it's amplifying traction so that your kind of like your profile rises to the top, so that you can be demonized by more bots, and that you'll be noticed by innocent observers as being unpopular.
Wow, that's awesome.
And it's a pandemic. It's like it's an epidemic. It's something that is just getting worse and worse and worse. And I don't know what the solution is. I mean, I don't know.
That's the concerning part.
Sure.
How do we go from here? And I don't know if there's an answer. Okay, but before we discuss that, let's speak about narrative. You mentioned that the Palestinians are doing an epic job
Fantastic.
at narrative.
Fantastic job.
Let's speak about that first,
Sure.
and then I want to do the flip side.
Okay.
Israel's narrative and why it's not that popular. You're a brand expert. Why is brand Palestinians so much more popular and so much sexier than brand Israel?
Okay. So when I say that they're doing an excellent job, of course it doesn't mean that I agree with the narrative. But they are doing a phenomenal, and they have been doing a phenomenal job for decades. When you're building a brand, as a this is my field of expertise. I've been doing this for around 30 years, and when you build a brand, you need to. It's based on a few things. It's based on what is your truth, what is your authentic reason for being. It's based on what is it that's different about you, and when you build your brand, you need to know who your audience is going to be. So if you look at the Palestinian cause, those people who have defined the Palestinian narrative as we know it today, boycott, divest, sanction Israel, BDS, and Iran, their narrative is, well, let's make Israel an oppressor, even though there's no oppression. Let's make Israel an apartheid state, even though there is no apartheid state. I mean, we have 2 million Arabs living in Israel. We have a Supreme Court. We have an Arab cinema. You've been to pharmacies here, doctors. I was in hospital around 3.5 years ago. I had 7 doctors. I had an issue for 10 days. I was hospitalized. 7 doctors. 4 of them were Arabs. Arabs. There's no apartheid here. But let's say genocide. So their narrative was oppression, genocide, apartheid, colonialism. That's the narrative that we're going to force down people's throats. Their story is very different, in terms of 75 years ago where they were, 100 years ago where they were, so they present that too, which is also partly false. And then who's their audience? And they picked their audience. They picked minorities, African Americans, the gay community, left-leaning liberals. And then they took all of that and they consistently put forward their message for decades. And they put money behind it. And they kept going. And they kept going. And they kept going. And so the narrative was built and it spread and it spread and it spread. And they invested in that narrative. On the other hand, Israel and the Jewish people have not invested in narrative over the last 2 or 3 decades. We've got Israel, startup nation. We're Jewish. Okay. But with the Palestinian rhetoric, they have been, even when times are good, even when times are bad, they are consistent with their narrative. You see an explosion right now of Jewish narrative right now online. At least we feel internally an explosion. But again, we're only 16 million people in the world. So I don't know how much people outside of our bubble are seeing that. But you're seeing an explosion right now because we've kind of like woken up to the fact that our narrative is pretty much non-existent. We don't even have a counter-narrative. So we're all scrambling. But their success is that they have been on message, not the true message, but on message. They have been consistent with it, and they've been putting money behind it. We've got thousands of influencers and Jewish organizations with thousands of different messages that are all over the place. And we're not consistent, and we haven't really invested in it. We haven't put, and that's the problem. And we have to start doing that, even though it's going to be practically impossible to counter it, because as a base, the Palestinian narrative has, and I think that we need to be honest about it, you're starting off with it around 1.6 billion Muslims who are naturally going to go to the Palestinian narrative based on what I'm seeing because they are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. We're 16 million. That's our base. massively, massively outnumbered. The crazy thing is, I'm all for the Palestinian cause. I'm all for a Palestinian people living side by side in peace with Israel. Side by side, though, not instead of. You can be critical of Israel and for the Palestinian people. I mean, I'm critical of my government on any given day, but I'm for innocent and peace-seeking Palestinians to live side by side with me. I just think that our narrative is it's critical to invest in narrative right now. It really is. And I think that that's where we don't do a good job. And I just don't think that we ever really have been. I think maybe the only time we ever have been good at narrative is when we've been the underdog, because people like the underdog. But I'll tell you what's interesting is we're still the underdog. You know, we were the underdog like in all the wars that Israel has had, because you see the map and we're surrounded by Arab countries that, you know, might not like us. But the narrative has been hijacked. We're seen as Israel is seen as a Goliath. But if you zoom out, you'll see that we're still very much the David. It's the perception. So the brand that the Palestinians have built, to me, is a perceived reality, but it is not reality. It's a much more sexy message. We're the underdog, we're poor, we're oppressed, it all sounds great, and it even, you know, even when I say it, I feel sympathetic. And I do, and I feel sympathetic for the Palestinian people because of what's happened to them, but not by Israel, by their own leaders. So it's a mess.
It's hard.
And it's so hard to, because I'm talking and I want to lead to some type of solution, some type of light, you know, and the light is truth, but it requires people to speak up. It requires people to learn. It requires people to do work, which a lot of people don't want to do because we're leading such cushy lives. We get up in the morning, we switch on our phone, we press the button, the coffee is made. It's work to get to the truth nowadays, but it's required.
Okay, let's go to that. What can we do? Now, you're speaking to a number of people who do want to do something.
I am.
Well, I'm here,
Yes.
and so
Help.
two things. Two things I want to speak about. The first, you said we need to counter the narrative, huh? And I'm going to be honest with you.
Sure.
You're Israeli, you like that. So
Only. As hard as it is, that's what matters, you know.
during the first few weeks after October 7th, I was on social media 24/7, and I countered everything I found. I would wake up at night and check things and then argue, but this isn't true. And I got into arguments with people about whether October 7th is true or false. Now, I feel like there is an audience the ship has sailed. We can't get them back. How do we step up in the social media war to counter the narrative without getting shot in the face in the first few minutes?
You have to accept that you're going to get shot in the face in the first few minutes.
Okay, who do we engage with and how do we counter?
I'm going to try and answer that without sounding bleak. Let's talk about what's driving what you can do first. The question that I ask myself every day is, what is the kind of world that you want to live in, Eitan? And I ask my children as well, and I speak to my children about this. Do you want to live in a world where I look at your lips and I say, yeah, your lips are green, but your lips aren't green, they're red? No, they're green. Do you want to live in a world where someone is saying to you something that isn't true and that we just accept it for some reason? Or are you going to fight for, no, your lips are red? Because today your lips are green, tomorrow the sky is purple, and the next day, and this is again going to 1984, things that are not true become true. It requires understanding that the truth is precious and the truth is important, and that your personal truth is important. It requires understanding that you can't take that for granted. Because if you just start accepting things as true without consistently examining whether they are true or not, then you're in a downward trajectory to where the world is going. That's what I believe. So, where can you go? I think that you have to look at, when people say something, to look at the person that's saying those things. Context. Examine context. Be less lazy. You know, and it's true. It's even like with people who advocate for the Jewish people. There are many, many Israelis, politicians, social people in the, social influencers, that I don't agree with. But I don't agree with them not based on a headline that I saw somewhere. I don't agree with them based on a headline that I saw, an article that I read, another news source that I went to on a different platform, conversations that I've had, trying to examine things from all sorts of different angles. Those are the people that I think that people should follow. Someone like Douglas Murray, who is at this stage not objective. He has an opinion, and he has a strong opinion, but he has a strong opinion based on what? Go and read his work. Go and watch, not the 30-second interview that got 5 million views. Read, and this requires the work. Watch the 45-minute interview in its entirety. Look at the articles that he's read. Look at the debates that he's had. Look at who he's had those debates with. Look at that other person's articles and independent interviews. I think that that's a commitment. That's a commitment to doing the work. And those are the type of people that I think that we should be following. Experts. Also on the other side, there are plenty of people who I might not agree with in terms of their opinion, but they're telling, as far as I can see, a truth, and some of their points are valid. Do you know what I mean? Like it's hard to. Well, who do we follow? What do we do?
It's the world we're living in, and if
we as individuals don't step up and ask for a better world, look, I can just say to you right now, look, genocide is awful. Okay, what's genocide? Let's have that conversation. Well, genocide is, okay. Are they causing it? Who says they're causing it? Who's not saying that they're causing it? You have to dig deeper. And I think that that's the biggest challenge. We're living in a society, we're living in a world where what we hear is what we think. And the more people that we're hearing saying something, then the more that we think that must be true, even though it might not be. So at least you have to be open to it. And the people to follow are the people who are presenting arguments based on fact and not based on what they're saying that will just trigger you for an emotional response. And it's very hard to find those people unless you're committed to making that something that you really, really care about. I care about truth. I care about it immensely. I mean, what's the point in living in a world that your lips are green? And it might be a silly example, but Today your lips are green. Tomorrow, the Jewish people are committing a genocide against the Palestinian people. But that isn't true. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Look at the facts. Facts. Yeah, I saw a picture of a dead baby. It's a fact. No, the dead baby was in a. You have to go back to what type of world do you want to live in, and as a father, what type of world do I want my kids to live in? I teach my kids to think critically. Look at a situation, examine it from all points of view, and make your own mind based on what you have found out by not being a lazy bum, as opposed to, yeah, that's what I tell them, as opposed to, yeah, he told me. So you believe that? Yeah, why would he lie? Well, maybe he has an agenda. Maybe she has an agenda. Oh, okay, I'm gonna think about that. You don't do that, you're screwed, and we're all screwed. So we all have a responsibility, you know.
I think that's the starting point. Responsibility. You need to make a decision. Do you want to have an opinion? If you do, you need to put in the work.
Yes, you have to put in the work. And I want to say one more thing, which is something that I think not enough people are talking about. We all know what happened. You know, we don't all know because people are denying that too. But the Holocaust, what happened to the Jewish people, where, you know, not that many years ago, 6 million people were slaughtered. Okay, why were they slaughtered? They weren't. People didn't just pick up guns and just shoot the Jews. People didn't just take them to the concentration camps and kill them. There was a movement of radicalization, and there was a narrative. And that narrative was more powerful because not enough people spoke up against the narrative. And by the time people woke up to what was happening in Germany, the Nazis had gained power. They controlled the narrative. They controlled the people. And at that stage, well, what they're saying must be true. They just went with it.
Does it scare you that that sounds exactly like the days we're living in?
Those are the days that we're living in. It doesn't scare me, it saddens me, but that is the world that we're living in. We're living in a world where people have forgotten. And when people say, look, it starts with the Jews, where does it end?
Exactly.
If you really think about what that means, you know, I have a vested interest in people believing that because I'm Jewish. And I'm not saying that because I don't want the world to be the way it was so it doesn't happen to the world. I'm honest with you. I don't want that to happen because I'm Jewish. And I also don't want that to happen because it's not the world that I believe in. But I try and think about what it was like in the Second World War. I try and think about what it was like living in Holland, in France, in Austria, in Poland, in Germany, when all of a sudden these bulldozers, these bullies of narrative came in, these mobs, and they force-fed you with something that wasn't true and made a lot of people believe that it was true. And to the people who were not sure, it didn't really matter because those people that were forcing that false narrative down your throat, they were stronger anyway. And they could do what they wanted. And how many millions of people besides the Jewish people died? How many wars? And for what? Because you didn't say anything. Because you shut up. We are there. If we do not speak up, you, me, Muslims, then we're going back. Something else I tell my kids is life is about the decision that you make. You don't have the luxury to leave it to someone else. It's your decision. I can come to this interview with you, or I cannot come to this interview with you. I can say this, or I cannot say this. Son, because I have 2 boys, you have a choice. You have a choice. Make the right choice. Always do the right thing. If you see something that isn't true and someone is hurting for it, speak up. Because if you don't, who's going to speak for you one day? You know, who's going to speak up for you? I think that's a Jewish value. But I don't think it's restricted to the Jews. I know that we have Muslim allies. I know that we have Christian allies. But I know that a lot of people are not talking. And it's so important that they talk. And if you can't express it, if you can't say it, then bloody follow me online and share what I'm saying. And that means that you will be sharing it too. But don't do it because I'm just telling you to. Go back, look at the things that I've said, look at the things that I believe in, and if you believe in them, then share. But speak. Do something based on an informed decision that you have made and not something that someone has just put out there that you think will make you look cool. That's the world that we're living in today. The perception is more important and attractive and will make you feel good than the reality. And I think it takes bravery and courage to speak up, especially when you're outnumbered. If it's the truth will win. So when you say, are you scared? Yeah, of course I'm scared, but I'm also confident. I'm confident that we will, when I say we, the collective we, I'm not talking about the Jewish people, I'm saying the people who believe in humanity and morality will win. Not because genocide is wrong, but because genocide, the genocide that you're saying is happening, is actually not happening. That truth will win because enough people will speak up. And what that actually does is it preserves the sanctity of the word genocide for when it really does happen. Because if you're saying that this is a genocide when it isn't, what happens when a real genocide happens? 1984. It doesn't mean anything anymore if you've already bastardized the word genocide, then people are going to pay it. So these things are precious. They affect everyone. So you've got to speak up. But you've got to speak up based on what you and I have been talking about, which is like based on the work that you do and and you have to be courageous. Those are the people that are going to make a difference, I think.
Now I have a question for you.
Ask away.
The people listening, if they want to be heard, and here's the background to that. We have so many people out there. And before the interview, when we were speaking, and I told you, Israel has so many Christians who stand with them, and you said, really? How will you hear us? If we want to speak up, where do we speak that you hear us?
I think, look, again, it comes back. Look, as a Jewish person right now, we're like this. You know, we are facing an existential threat, and we are in crisis mode. We are in emergency mode, and we are all fighting. I mean, I can tell you right now, almost 5 months, we're exhausted. Our army is tired. The people speaking up are tired against all the hate. The economy here is suffering. You see Jewish people everywhere around the world. There's insane anti-Semitism. And in many ways, it's easier for us here. Yes, there's a war going on in Israel, and a looming war as well. You know, by the time this airs, I don't know where we're going to be with the situation in the north with Hezbollah, let alone Hamas. But we're not seeing, we're feeling support, but we're feeling much more hatred and much more intolerance than we are seeing support because of who's up against us and what a phenomenal job they've been doing in terms of sowing the seeds of false narratives. It's very simple. It's what we've been talking about. When we see people speaking up, when we see people countering things that are really false, then we'll see it. And I'm certainly not complaining. I'm just saying we don't see it enough. We don't see it enough in the media. We don't see it in the comment sections of Facebook, and we don't see it on TikTok. We don't see it in many different ways. Like you look at American campuses right now. American campuses, I don't know if your viewers know, but again, our problems are small because we're so small as a demographic. 0.2% of the planet. That's 0.2% of the planet is what the Jewish people are. Campuses, we're not even perceived as a minority. You know, that's the way a lot of Jewish people feel. So the blacks are perceived as a minority, Asians are perceived as a minority, the gay community are perceived as a minority. Even women, they're not a minority, but they're perceived as, you know, receiving hatred and misogyny. The Jewish people, well, we deserve it. You know, that's kind of like the perception that we're seeing a lot of the time, unless people speak up. So how is to just literally do it, is to just get in the fight. It's everyone's fight. It's, you know, today it's us, tomorrow it's going to be someone else. I don't want to go to the Nazi analogy again, but you know, if it swells too much, there's a point of not a point of no return because we came back from the Nazis, but there's a point of a huge there's a price for silence, you know. And again, I want to make one thing clear, because this is always the argument. Whenever you say, but you're silent about the Palestinian cause, so why should we trust you? Because I'm not silent about the Palestinian cause. I want the Palestinians who want to live side and side in peace with us to live in peace and prosperity. I want that. But I don't want a Palestinian state taking over us, and I don't want a Palestinian state sworn to our destruction side by side, and I don't want Palestinians who are allowed to spread hate and intolerance that will ultimately lead to my demise. That I'm not for, but I am for peace. That's what I believe, and I think that people, good people, should say the same thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with what I just said. I want peace.
Right.
Just not with people who don't want peace with me. And if they don't want peace with me and they want to kill me, then it's war. And I think anyone would say the same thing. You know, not at the expense of my survival and not at the expense of my kids' survival. And I don't think that Israel being a state and the Jewish people being who they are in the world is at the expense of anyone else. I think that's the story that our enemies are trying to tell. But we've made peace with our neighbors. We have no interest in an endless war. We have no interest in the destruction of Muslims. We have no interest in the destruction of the Palestinian people as a state. We have no interest in apartheid. We have no interest in colonialism. We have no interest in genocide. We have no interest in any of that stuff. What we have an interest in is coexistence and peace. And I would like to think that all moderate people in the world believe in that too. So if you're moderate, speak up.
Thank you so much. This has been so insightful
And complicated.
but isn't it always? Isn't it? Except for at McDonald's, there it's something.
You know what? It is complicated, but at the same time, I'll challenge you. Is it that complicated? It isn't.
No.
It isn't.
But we make it that.
Yes.
We make it that. And you said, oh, it's bleak. I'm going to be bleak with you. You're going to get shot in the face within the first 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. Maybe it isn't. Because, guys, do you want to sit on the sidelines as history unfolds? No.
No. If you were in Germany in the 30s, what would you have done? The problem is you're having a lot of people who have been brainwashed, who are, again, I'm saying for the Palestinian cause. I'm saying that because I'm for the real Palestinian cause, which is existence and self-determination, that are saying, yeah, but you're doing the same thing that the Germans did to the Jews and to the world in the 30s. And that's because they've been brainwashed. That is the truth that you must speak up against based on digging deep, reading multiple sources, going to experts and not 19-year-old people on TikTok who have never read a book in their lives. Sorry, Gen Z. Is that the type of world that you want to live in? If you were in the 30s, would you have spoken up or not? And some people are standing up and saying, I'm speaking up. I think the people that are really speaking, I know that you wanted to end this, but I think that the people who are really speaking up, based on research and doing the real work that is required are so brave. There are Arabs right now, there are Muslims who are speaking up for the Jewish people because they realize that it's in their best interest to do so, because to give birth to a country, Palestine, not traditional Palestine, which even they hijacked the name of Palestine because it's a whole conversation about where the origins of the name of Palestine. But is it in their interest to give birth to a nation based on the blood and the sacrifice of children who they're celebrating as martyrs? Or is it in their best interest to celebrate their children's lives and to come to the negotiating table and to do the hard work of living side by side, even when you've lost something that you wanted? We weren't around almost 100 years ago, but we are now. I don't think it's that complicated. I think it's pretty simple, but getting there requires courage and bravery. I respect anyone who can reach resolution and reconciliate and tolerate the other, as long as the other is not a homicidal, psychotic sociopath like Hamas or Hezbollah or Al-Qaeda or ISIS or any of those groups. Those are the ones that you should be against. I think those are the people that you should speak up against. My personal opinion.
Eitan, you said you're not an expert.
No, I'm not.
Maybe you're just an expert in human beingness. Or in critical thinking.
Maybe. I don't know. Ask my wife.
Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And thank you.
Guys, I've learned a lot, and I realized that I came to this interview with a misconception. I thought speaking out meant that I'm going to do something, I'm going to say something, and the Jewish people in Israel, they are going to notice, and it isn't. Speaking out often means one person is going to notice, or two people, or no one. But it means doing the right thing. It means that I am shaping the world that I want my daughter to live in. It means that I can look myself in the eye. So, what does it take to do that? Work, apparently.
Work. We came here to work. We came here to make the world a better place. And even when it looks like we're not doing that, it's a choice. Right. We have a choice. We always have a choice. You can do this or you can do that. And you got to make a choice. Don't let someone else make that choice for you.
I know you. I know who you are. I know who is listening to this. And I know that you are not going to allow this to continue. You are going to speak out, because this is important to you. And I know that the last thing you are going to do is to sit on the sidelines of history while a world is being shaped against our values, against biblical values. So do the work and speak up, even if no one is listening.